Well, Circadian was built in England in 1975, designed by Laurent Giles, who's a very famous British designer. It's my second English boat, and I kind of like them because generally they are good sea boats, because British boats spend a lot of time in the North Sea, which is pretty rough. And since I've had Circadian, she's proved she is a good sea boat and can handle rough water a lot better than I can. So we'll kind of go down, look at her a little bit, and I'll point out some key features of the design and so on. So one of the things you'll notice is the bow kind of goes up.
Yes.
And that's sort of a trademark of Laurent Giles as well. And if you come over here, you see there's a definite flare out to the boat like this. And what that does is it keeps the bow from burying, and it sends a spray out to the side. So it's a very dry boat. I've never gotten solid water on deck, and I've been in some pretty rough seas. So it's a Rockna, which a lot of cruisers use. They're one of the better modern design anchors, all of which pretty much work better than the older designs. Some might think it's oversized as long as you can pull it up. I don't think that's possible. Most problems happen at anchor, and it's someplace where I think you don't skim.
Yeah. Have you ever drugged with the...
Oh, sure, but only before it sets. Once it's set, doesn't drag. While we're talking about the anchor, I want to point out something, because I see a lot of really often experienced cruisers do it wrong, and it can be dangerous. And that's the way you connect the anchor to the chain. On the shackle, you want the curved part on the anchor so that it can swivel around and everything stays in alignment. Because all the breaking strength stuff you read about everything from the chain to swivels to shackles is done in a straight line pull. And if you put the pin through a small hole in an anchor, it'll twist and put weird stresses on it. I also have an expensive windlass. The two probably items on the boat that I really spent a lot of money on were the windlass and the autopilot, which I'll talk about later. Both of which, especially as a single-hander, I find to be really critically important.
Thank you. So this is a beautiful blue hull.
Thanks.
Is it warm inside, or is it...
It's not as much warmer as I think some people think. I would say the big disadvantage of it is it's very unforgiving in terms of any rubbing against the dock, any chafing, dirt, dried salt, everything shows.
Yeah.
And if you don't keep it polished up, it's going to start to fade and look bad. This paint, and it is paint, it's 2-part polyurethane, is now 8 years old at least, probably closer to 10.
Wow.
Still looks good because I take care of it.
Yeah.
The same thing with all the bright work you see. If you talk to different cruisers, some will love it, some will hate it. And what they love about it is the way it looks. Nobody loves all the maintenance it takes.
Varnish.
Well, I use what's called Cetol, and that seems to last a lot longer than varnish, but it does require annual maintenance. And it's kind of a discipline. I love wood, so for me it's worth it. For many cruisers, it's not worth it, and they look for boats without wood outside. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of features on the stern here that are a little bit unusual.
Okay.
First of all, as you see those big chain plates back there,
Yes.
those are enormous, and you could pick the boat up by those, no problem. And what they are for is, those are for a drag device. And if you ever get in kind of a survival sea, you have a drogue that you can drag, and I use a Jordan series drogue, which is a series of small cones that goes out about 50 yards. And it keeps the stern pointed into the waves and keeps you from pitch poling or otherwise getting into serious trouble.
Have you ever had to deploy the
No.
drogue?
No. I look at it as an insurance policy. It's something that I think if you're going to go out and do ocean cruising, you should have, but you hope you never use it.
Yes.
And if you do a good job...
If you have it, you won't have to use it, right?
Well, that's one of Murphy's laws, yeah. So that's kind of an interesting feature. You'll also notice I've got 2 more anchors back here.
Yes.
This one is a very light aluminum anchor, which I use when I want to put down a stern hook. And the reason I have a light aluminum anchor is because it makes it very easy to throw in the dinghy that you see here and go out and deploy it and pull it up by hand from the dinghy, bring it back. It has good holding power in a straight line, which when you're anchored bound stern is where the pole's going to be. Another thing I'd like to mention while we're back here is the dinghy and the davits and the whole thing. It really helps to think of things on your boat as systems rather than single items. So this dinghy happened to come with the boat. It's not what I would consider an ideal dinghy, but it serves my purposes okay. What I really love are the davits. They crank up and down. I can lower this dinghy, start the engine, and be off in 5 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
So I have a really close friend who's always making fun of how slow the dinghy is in the water. And I always say, okay, I'll be happy to race you to shore, but the race starts after you've gotten the boat anchored and you're ready to get in the dinghy and go. Because many people, their dinghy is stowed on deck or on the cabin top, and they have to use a halyard, pick it up, put it in the water, go over, get the engine off its bracket, put that on the dinghy, and so on and so forth. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So if you think of your system, your dinghy, as a system, you'll think it through better. I also have beaching wheels on the back of the dinghy, which most cruisers have, because the whole point of the dinghy often is just to get ashore. And once you get ashore, you got to pull the dinghy up on the beach. A lot easier if you've got dinghy wheels. What I like about these is they're easy to put down into the water and pull out of the water with one hand. What I don't like about them is the wheels aren't big enough. So unless you're in very firm sand, they sink into the sand and they don't do anything.
What is this, George?
That is a wind vane. The brand is Hydrovane, also made in England. And that blue paddle that you see sticking up is part of it, and it's connected to shafts that go down into the water with a rudder. The rudder is not attached at the moment, but what happens is that you can set it to hold the boat on a wind course. By that I mean it'll keep to the same relative angle to the wind. So when you're sailing, if the boat is well balanced, that will essentially steer the boat to stay on the same course relative to the wind.
So that definitely helps you as a single-handed.
Oh yeah. The beauty of it is it doesn't use any electricity. It's purely mechanical. It's totally quiet. And if you want to sail, it'll keep you on the right course to sail.
Good.
Those dueling barbecues we see, George?
Well, hopefully they don't fight. But yeah, they're two barbecues.
Can't have too many.
And there's no really sophisticated reason why. The small blue one is a charcoal barbecue, and I've had that forever. I like charcoal. Politically incorrect now, but I like it sometimes. And if you're ever in a very remote place and you can't find propane, which is what the larger one uses, you can always find something to burn and turn it into charcoal.
What's this black pipe next to your on your railing?
This is where I store the little blue green propane cartridges, and also the valves, fuel valves. But it's almost like this thing was sized perfectly to hold these little things. Something that people sometimes get careless with is how they store their propane. And I personally know 2 cruisers who have had explosions on their boat.
Oh.
Both were hospitalized, both survived, they were lucky. One was using these little green canisters, but they made the mistake of storing them below decks. And one of them was defective and leaked, and there was a spark, and boom. So I can keep 3 or 4 in here, and it's above deck and safe. Okay, we're down inside the main cabin now, and I've just been going through the lighting. Every light on this boat, including the navigation lights, is LED. And that saves battery power. I've got solar panels outside, which are quite common on cruising boats. It's part of trying to balance the electrical demand with the ability to generate it. I can sit at anchor indefinitely without running the engine and have enough electrical power if I'm mindful of my use of electricity. Having some background as a photographer, I'm very conscious about lighting. So the lighting in here in the cabin is quite versatile. I have overhead lights that I can put on in various combinations depending on where you want the light and how bright you want it to be. I've also installed strip lights right in front of the cabinets here, and they're kind of fun to play with. Right now what you're seeing is the bright white, which when you're washing dishes or working in the galley, it's pretty nice. On the other hand, sometimes you want something that's in a little bit nicer mood. Green is not one of my favorites, but that's what it is now, but it's pretty easy to change it to something else, as you see. And you can also adjust the brightness. So if you want mood lighting, and there's some things that I'll spare you, like getting them to flash and slowly automatically change from one to another. If you want to open a bar down below decks, you can do that too. Every boat has little what I call trick items, which, because you're always fighting a battle with space, things tend to convert from one thing to another. One of those little things on Circadian is the dish strainer, which can be used to cover the sink and provide more counter space, and then it's easily converted to a nice dish strainer, and it's set up so that it drains down into the sink. When you're done, it's not a big deal to take it, put it back, get it out of the way, create a little more counter space.
So here we are in the cockpit.
Yeah, a lot of time gets spent here, and this is a center cockpit design, which is probably in the minority of boat designs, sailboat designs. And like everything else about designs, everything's a trade-off. Trade-off with the center cockpit is that you have a separate cabin, half cabin, where you can stash people you'd rather have some distance from. And there's a little more privacy, and so on and so forth. Also, usually it gives you good access to the engine, which is something that I always insist upon when I buy a boat. Good engine access, because you want to take care of that engine, and you're more likely to do it if it's easy to do those maintenance items that you really have to do. One of the things that's unusual about this particular center cockpit design is it's got a hard dodger or a doghouse, whatever you want to call it. It's like 3/4 of a pilot house. And it was part of the original design of the boat, which means the windage that it has and the aesthetics and all that stuff were considered when the boat was designed as a whole. And a lot of times when people decide, gee, I really would like a hard dodger, and they put something on there, it looks tacky, it looks amateurish, something like that. This does not. Once you've had at least a partially enclosed cockpit, you never go back, because you're warmer, you're out of the wind, you're more comfortable, and psychologically you're less stressed out and less worried. It's quite amazing the big difference it makes. And something that's very unusual about this particular center cockpit design is the wheel is right up against the forward bulkhead, and I've got a nice comfortable chair to sit in when I'm at the helm. Most of the time when people add a hard dodger or a canvas dodger, the wheel is still back 8 or 10 feet away from that dodger, so it's really not doing you any good. So this is one of the few boats that actually has the helm up under the shelter. The other one is a French design called an owl that has that feature. And another nice thing about the hard dodgers, it gives me a place to mount instruments. They stay dry. I never have to worry about them getting wet. They're out of the sun.
Sun as well.
Yeah. And they're very handy, very easily seen, very easily pushed buttons. One of the things that's a little atypical now about my philosophy of instrumentation is I like everything to be separate. The trend now is to get fully integrated networks with a huge full color screen, and it looks pretty and it's a lot of fun for people who like gadgetry. My concern is that if that central unit goes down, you lose everything. So by keeping things separate, if one goes down, you've only lost that function.
So you have your radar separate.
Correct. Radar is separate. GPS chart plotter is separate. I have a transmitting and receiving AIS. And a little unusual, and partly it's because I'm cheap, but partly because I found it works really well. I just use an iPad for my chart plotter. And lets me put that away and get it separate and program I use is easy to use.
What's the program that you use?
iNavX.
Okay.
So everything works.
So
pretty
when you're
well.
underway, do you primarily sit under here, or do you, when you're on
Yes.
autopilot, you can go outside, you can
You
wander
can.
around?
I would say probably 80% of the time I'm in the cockpit. And because the autopilot works so well, I don't have to stay glued to the helm. And by I brought this boat down from the United States in the Baja in 2016, which was the roughest one they've ever had. They lost a boat. I know 2 boats that lost 2 engines. At the first stop, we spent several days getting the boats repaired. Circadian had only minor little glitches, but the autopilot handled the rough seas all by itself, no problem at all. And it's a Will Ham WH autopilot. Most people never heard of it. It's made up in the Pacific Northwest. Primary customers are the fishermen up there who go out in rough seas every single day. So they don't care about glamour, they care about something that's going to keep working day after day under rough conditions. It's below decks, it's linked to the boat's hydraulic steering, so it's silent, it's powerful, and I love it. It's quite reliable. Okay, I'm headed down into the engine compartment, and as I said earlier, I think good engine access is really important because you've got to take good care of your engine. A friend of mine, when he had his boat surveyed, one of the comments the surveyor made was, "I can see you really love your boat, but you only like your engine." So I think you better love your engine because you're going to be counting on it and you want it to be reliable. So again, take care of it. So I make it easier to get in down below. I'm standing right now under one of the seats in the cockpit. Just lift up the lid and you'll see how I just step right down into the engine room. But before I do that, I can also remove the helm seat and remove the cockpit sole, take it completely out, and have total access to the engine. Now, for normal engine maintenance, I don't need to do that. I can do everything for routine oil changes and things like that right through here quite easily. Okay, so I've installed steps to come down into the engine room. And what you see down here that looks like a toolbox is a toolbox. And inside it are, guess what? Tools, as well as oil filters, fuel filters, and so on. And it's really proved to be very, very handy. I'm down here and I suddenly realize, oh, there's a loose nut somewhere, or I need to do something. I don't have to go all the way out and look around, get my tools, bring them back down, and discover I have them all except the one I need. All the basic tools are right here.
That's smart.
That's great. So George,
Yeah.
this is great down here. Got pretty good access. But I noticed your air cleaner's missing. What's that about?
Well, what that is about is that's the last item on my annual engine maintenance, and turns out it's a little bit hard to source the right air cleaner here in Mexico, so I haven't found one yet, and that's what I'm waiting for.
What kind of engine is it?
It's a Beta, B-E-T-A. One of the things that people like about the Beta is that they designed it to make maintenance easy. So in the rear of the engine next to the transmission there is an oil removal pump. So when you do your oil changes, you don't have to deal with some kind of external oil pump to suck the oil out. You just put a jug under there and pump it right out.
Wish we had that.
A lot of people do.
I have engine envy. Let's peek inside the aft cabin.
Hi, welcome to the aft cabin.
Very cozy.
Thank you. I really like it. It's a very warm and cozy feeling because it's got so much woodwork, which I did myself. Spent 8 months restoring this, building it out. As you may or may not be able to see from that angle, it's got 2 single quarter berths, which are very secure sea berths. And what you can't see in one corner over here is a small head. It's got a little porta potty in it, which I deliberately chose to do because it's pretty much fail-safe. Lisa was noticing my Seacock's closed sign, so I'm going to show you the trick it does, which you flip it over and it says it's open. Now, why would you need something like this? Well, because there's no limit to what I can forget. Most marine diesels are cooled by seawater, which flows through the engine and goes out the exhaust. To prevent seawater from coming back through the exhaust system, there's always, or should always be, a loop with an anti-siphon valve at the top of the loop. The problem with those valves is, like anything else that's mechanical, they can jam, they can break, they can fail. And it's not always obvious that they have failed. And that can result in seawater going through the loop and destroying the engine completely. So what I did was remove the valve at the top of the loop and replace it with a little piece of hose that goes through the side of the settee and just spits the exhaust water and a little bit of exhaust down into the cockpit where it goes out the cockpit drain. Nice thing about that, besides there's no valve to fail, is that I immediately see that cooling water is circulating through the engine. So if there's ever a problem with that, I'll know it immediately, shut the engine down and save it. Okay, when I'm out at sea on the boat, this is probably my favorite place to sit. It's very comfortable and I have good vision. Of course, this canvas is gone and the screens are off the windows, so I have good visibility. I can see the instruments and it's very comfortable.
Nap time.
I'm sailing, a touch of liberty. I'm sailing, a glimpse of eternity. All my dreams came true. Now my dreams are you. Feel the breeze to touch